Welcome to the first TT talk, DTP for Translators with Chris Thompson. So, as you have guessed, this is the first ever TT talk, so we are super excited, that you are all here with us. Just a small housekeeping note. Please feel free to chat to each other in writing. And if you have any questions, let us know as well. We are here to help you if you have any technical questions as well. And most of you already know about TeamTranslator and what we do. You are part of the community, but that everyone knows what we do and what you can get out of TeamTranslator if you're a member. We are an online community on Slack, where we try to help each other with advice. We've also created some business resources that are available for download on our website. We also hold regular co-working sessions. At the moment, we have 2 per week, one on Wednesdays that is outreach. So if you want to get all the sales and marketing out of the way, every week you have 1 hour where you can do that in a very focused manner. And then on Thursdays, we also have other co-working session where you can just do client work or any other administrative task that you might need to do. We also have regular chats on different topics. We call these TTTs. As you can tell, we love a good alliteration. And we also have exclusive member offers. So as a member, you can get discounts on certain offers and courses and conferences as well. So you need to keep an eye on our member offer channel on Slack. And now we also have webinars. The best thing is all of this is free. And how we can do this, Kelsey will tell you more about this. Thank you.
So as Aniko said, we love to keep everything free. We want to keep everything free here. We're completely volunteer run. Aniko and I founded TeamTranslator, what is it, 3 years ago now? And we've been completely volunteer run since then, also with the help of our wonderful moderators. But obviously all of this isn't free to run. There are some back-end costs in terms of web hosting and creating resources and platform fees and everything like that. So we do ask sometimes for donations, and obviously all of those member offers help us as well. And the idea behind TeamTranslator, keeping everything free, the idea is that we really want to make sure that the widest amount of freelance translation professionals have access to all of these resources, because we believe that keeping these resources free means that we can improve the industry as a whole. If everybody has access to the knowledge, then hopefully the translation industry just starts getting a little bit better. So yes, if you are able to, if you have the funds, we would appreciate a donation. Donations are starting from £1 and there's no higher limit. Every little bit helps us. And you can do one-time donations or set it up for monthly donations as well. So please do consider that. Yeah. Now I will get on to introducing our speaker. Say hi to Chris. Chris is a TeamTranslator regular. He's a multilingual DTP expert, desktop publishing expert. After graduating with French, German, and Italian, Chris got his start in the translation industry, initially producing summary articles from international business press. Then he went to work in database localization and database publishing, followed by a stint wearing too many hats as a project manager in a translation company, which is, I know a thing or two about. And he's been freelance since 2008, an affiliate member of the ITI and a member of the CIOL. And like I said, Chris has been a long-standing member of TeamTranslators since the very early days, and we're absolutely delighted to have him on board and excited to hear more from him. Just a little housekeeping before we get started, before I hand it over to Chris. Chris has said that he'll answer all questions at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions in the chat, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll pick those up and ask Chris at the end. But there is one caveat to this. Chris is very happy to stop and go over something again if you don't understand something. So if if he's gone through a slide and you're going, not quite sure I got that, feel free to flag it in the chat and we'll make sure that Chris knows and he can go over it again if you need to. So yeah, I think that's it from me, Chris. Feel free to take it away.
Okay then. I think I need to share my screen.
Yes, please.
Just so you know what's happening, I'm looking at my laptop screen with Zoom on it, but the presentation is over there. So if it looks like I'm distracted, don't worry about it. I'm not. Also, obviously, I won't be able to monitor the chat, so I'm relying on the team to look at that. And
Don't worry,
I
we've got
think
your
if I
back.
do that, yeah, good. We should have an opening screen.
Exactly. We can see it.
If anybody can't, it's a good time to put it in the chat. But otherwise, I shall carry on. So, desktop publishing, as it's called, we're going to be looking at what exactly it is. We'll have a look at some software. We'll have a look at how things run through the process, because the translation is only part of that process. And we'll have a look at not just translating the words, but translating what the original designer intended, and have a little diversion into fonts and writing systems, which are often the bane of the typesetter. So, having said we're going to explain what DTP is, I'll just explain what it isn't. It's not men in braces with hot metal pieces of type on great big machines producing massive books. It's also not about deconstructing PDF files, which often people describe as DTP. but really that's desktop unpublishing. You're taking apart something that is meant for publication. And to talk about that would take the whole of the session anyway. I know because I've done it. So although it's not about all those great big machines and hot metal, those things were still in production right up to 76. The first proper desktop publishing program was PageMaker, which arrived in 85. And because of that changeover, a lot of the terminology has actually come from traditional printing in those examples there. So leading is that second one, is literally strips of lead which went between lines of text. And the upper case, there was a case full of letters. The upper one was further away from the typesetter, as in up in the air, because it contained the capital letters that you don't need so often. So why do we need this specialist software? Why can't we just use Word, throw a few pictures in and everything's happy? Well, it's about finding the right tool for the job. There's a great quote there from a former Leeds translation student who, working on a graphics-heavy Word file, as soon as you change a letter or two, the content just jumped around. And why can't we just convert to PDF? Well, you can, and it works reasonably well if you just want the translation for information purposes. But if it needs to be published again in another language, it can be something of a different matter. The old saying of if the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, is quite appropriate there. People are using Word to produce stuff that's meant for publication and printers, or using Excel to write a dissertation. It's all possible, but it's not the best way of doing it. So among the software, excuse me, I just need to drink. Among the software that's used in this process, there's kind of three categories. pictures and drawings, there's a subtle difference between the two. One's more photographic and one's more diagrammatic. The first two are things like Photoshop and Illustrator in the Adobe stable of products. You may have come across Paint or Corel Draw, things like that. The area that I mostly deal with is in page layout, where the sort of de facto standard software is Adobe InDesign. Quark Express used to be the kind of industry standard, but it got rather overtaken by InDesign. Adobe FrameMaker's worth a mention there. Very good for making highly technical documents. And a couple of others there that you may possibly have come across. And then the newcomers on the block are kind of Canva, which you may well be familiar with, and Affinity, which is a kind of desktop all three thing, now owned by Canva, in fact, that combine all those different kinds of document. Here's a picture of one of the reasons you might want to use proper software for the job. You can pull in pictures and drawings from other sources. So in the design process, you can have artists working on the visual content of the document and placeholders for the work that they're working on, while a typesetter produces the text elements of the document. And just press a button and combine the two later. Also, there's far greater typographic control than word processing software. There's some example dialog boxes there from InDesign, with things like not allowing a paragraph to have only 2 lines dangling over the edge of another page, to force lines to stay together to make the layout look more neat and tidy. And, you know, more controls than you really could think of to control the way text looks. It's also set up for print industry requirements. On the left there, you can see, sometimes you see on a PDF, or very occasionally on something printed, the color selector there, and those little crop and bleed marks is what they're actually called, where you print over the edge of what's going to be the page, and it's then sliced off to get the ink to run all the way to the edge of the paper. And ditto on the right there, you can see the standard industry Pantone color to specify your corporate image color precisely for the printers to produce. What's it used for? Originally printed material. Now, of course, much published material is published only as in PDF format. The stuff that goes to print is often sent as a PDF with all those instructions to the printers to deal with it. And it's things like brochures and manuals and so on, and books. And of course, where the translation industry comes in, where these publications may need localized or even multilingual versions. Here's a bit of a meta slide. It's a screenshot of InDesign being used to design this screen. You can see top, left, and right all the different control palettes and other controls to manipulate what's on the page. The one key difference from word processing software is that everything goes in its own box. Whether it's text or graphics, it goes in its own box or frame, as they're termed. Unlike word processing software, where you open the document and start typing and you're away. The software tends to be quite specialist. There's a lot of features in it, and I mean a lot. I've been using InDesign for 15 plus years, and there's many of its tools that I never even touch. Translators therefore tend not to have those programs in their armory. However, some page layout tools can produce compatibility formats which can be handled by your CAT tools. You may well have come across IDML files or MIF files from the two Adobe products, which enable the CAT tool to ignore all the formatting and graphics elements of the file. But the translators concentrate on the text content. Then once it's translated, it reopens into InDesign, repositions all the graphic elements and formatting with, in theory, only a minimal amount of extra work to do to tidy up the result, more of which we'll talk about later. Unfortunately, some of these desktop publishing page layout programs don't have a CAT tool compatibility format. The plus points to those formats are that the translators use their familiar tools with all those advantages. There's no need for whoever's doing the typesetting to copy and paste pages and pages and pages of translation. Hence, it's much less error prone and quicker. And the detailed formatting is maintained. There's a couple of downsides. If the original design has text which is contained within a graphics file, that's not picked up automatically by the CAT tool. If the text is really heavily tagged and formatted, it can cause some confusion and problems in that the formatting of what needs to be bold or italic in a sentence may be different according to the grammar of the target language. And this last point I've repeated in both sides of the plus and minus. Sometimes the source can be rather over-formatted, and it turns out to be easier to clear it and start again to produce the thing. So there are other ways of handling it than the compatibility formats. One of which is send a PDF or Word file to the translator, which is translated, copy and pasted. But there's obviously downsides to that being slower. It is possible for a translator to work directly in the DTP file. In all these years of freelancing, I once translated something inside an Illustrator file. And it was a pain, really, because you couldn't use any CAT tools, and Illustrator for text is relatively clunky. And the last resort, which we're not really going to talk about here, is convert a PDF file. And that results in what you can only describe as variable quality. So, Kelsey, was there any questions and queries so far that are worth picking up, or should we carry on?
Nothing so far, Chris. Keep on going.
Yeah, good. All right, I shall carry on. So when we run through this process of producing a translated version of a publication, a lot of the work, probably 3/4 or more, is about what they call copy fitting. In other words, making the text fit and making the text look right. We can have a look at a made-up project which I put together for this, in fact, for another presentation ages ago, looking at the original design and how the content will then get translated and how we need to adapt the design. So we have a project. It's a basic anatomy book. We've got the bones of the hand with a nice picture of the bones labels on various different individual bones with lines pointing to the relevant part, and a paragraph of text stolen from Wikipedia to describe what's going on in there, which looks simple enough until we look at the structure of the InDesign file, in fact, in this case. And we can spot a number of potential problems when the words get translated. Looking at number 1 and looking down that side, we can see that ideally with those labels, the right-hand end of the text should touch or nearly touch the left-hand end of the lines. However, we've got here text in the left-hand aligned boxes, so that any change in the length of the text will take place at the right-hand end of the text, which will either be too far away from the lines or will crash into them and be obliterated by the text. If you look at the second of those boxes, intermediate phalanges, you can see there's a sneaky return where they forced the second word onto a new line. But can you see my cursor there on intermediate?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, good. Obviously, that's going to cause problems with segmentation in your cat tool. On the third one, proximal phalanges, the text box actually extends off the side of the page. So if it does turn out longer, that one's correctly right aligned, but the text is in danger of disappearing into nowhere. Elsewhere, number 2, where the text has to fit around the bones at the bottom, around the wrist area. Our helpful designer, that was me actually playing around, our helpful designer has manually aligned the text so that it doesn't crash into the picture. You can see there's a box to contain the big paragraph that runs along to this point here and down, and they've thrown in a bunch of tabs, which is this sort of double chevron thing on the first and second lines to force the text around, and then these little corner things, I don't know what you can call those. Those are new line breaks to force the text down. And of course, when this gets translated, it will very probably be a different length, and those tabs and new lines will be in entirely the wrong place. Also at number 3, there's a quite subtle problem about to happen in that the words "the hand," you can see there's no box around them, which is a good indication that they're actually part of the graphic. So they won't appear in your cat tool and therefore won't get translated until somebody sees it at the end and say, oh no, and has to go back to the translator, round the circle again to bring up to bring in the translation of "the hand." So there is the problem file thrown into a cat tool. This was WordFast back in the days when I was using that. You can see at segments 3 and 4 what one phrase has been split into 2 segments, which is going to potentially cause problems. For example, if you didn't realise they belong together, if the adjective has to agree with the noun, you may get the wrong agreement. If the 2 words are in a different order, they'll be in the wrong order in the target language. If the 2 words are actually a single word in a language like German, for example, for compound nouns, then you're running into problems there. Why is there a light bulb over on the left? That's to remind me to tell you the joke about how many translators it takes to change a light bulb. It depends on the context. Pause for laughter. Then it's not just the linguistic context, but it's the visual context that's important in dealing with these documents. So if you take one thing away from today, I would say that if you get sent an IDML file for translation, insist on having a PDF of it as well, so you can see the visual context of what you're working on. Then also there in segment 8, you can see where those tabs and line breaks have been thrown into the big paragraph. So now I've gone back to the source InDesign document to try and fix up some of these problems before we send it to translation. The labels down the left-hand side are now in boxes with room for expansion and are right aligned so that any longer words move away from the start of the lines connecting them to the picture. I've added, if you can see over there on the right, the hand is now in a text box. That's a text box with a white background to obliterate the words which are embedded in the graphic, which is a bit of a clunky way of doing it. You could also go into the graphic in a graphics program and erase the words. You'd still need to put the text box there. And then the third thing, we've turned on text wrap on the graphic, which is a very clever feature that detects the shape of an object in a graphic and wraps the text around it. You can see now there's no fancy formatting down the right-hand edges of the big paragraph. It's purely software that's pushed them away from the picture. I think in retrospect, I may have put, it would have been better to put a non-breaking space with between 27 and bones to get the figure next to the word. But however, so having prepared that one and run it into a cat tool and out again, we've now got a Dutch version. Now I chose Dutch because not many people know it. So people are going to be looking at the visual aspects of it rather than trying to pick holes in the actual words of the translation. So it's been through the cat tool, it's come out again, we've opened it into InDesign, and it's mostly there. There's a couple of little problems which I've highlighted with these yellow stickies here. Up at the top here, we've got the little red plus sign, which is overset text, as they call it. Too much text for the size of the box. So we need to make the box bigger. Annoyingly, the gap between the two bones of the forearm, the radius and the ulnar, I think, is just the right size to put a tiny word in, which is somewhat annoying. And also that text box is also overset. So a couple of tidy ups later, and we've adjusted the text wrap. You see this little outline now around the bones of the hand. It's now set to push the text away by a certain amount of millimeters, which is enough to force that small word away from the gap between the bones. I've slightly moved the text box, expanded it upwards a bit to make a little more room. I've expanded the big title box at the top to enable the large title to fit. I've done a couple of little things. I've had another non-breaking space to keep the abbreviation with the following words. I think that's IE, isn't it? DWZ, in effect. But anyway. So now we've got, with all the layout stuff removed, we've got a nice looking page for our for our basic anatomy manual, and it's now all in Dutch, and it looks reasonably nice. You could probably improve it if you wanted to, but I think hopefully that's given you an idea of what a poorly prepared versus a well-prepared InDesign document can result in the translation process.
Chris, we've
Yes.
got a question from Irene in the chat.
Yeah.
She's asking, how did you turn text on the graphic into a text box you can translate? Is this easy to do in a tool like InDesign?
No, I literally made a text box and typed the words in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? There's no special trickery. There's no special software involved. It's just I made a new text box and wrote the words in.
Yeah, and then
InDesign.
and turned and turned the background white to
and the background to that text box is white, so that you can't see what's in the original graphic. The alternative way to do that would be to go in and manipulate the graphic file, but there's no actual need to do that, because then particularly on a multi-language product, you might end up with multiple versions of the same graphic, and it's kind of easier to keep the same version if you can.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Chris.
Does that make sense? Good. Okay. Excellent. Thanks for the question, by the way. Keep them coming, because if I've explained something not very well, it won't just be one person who doesn't get it. It's the one that raises their hand that gets the answer. So that kind of brings us on to project management. So that preparation can make a big difference to the quality, but also the speed and smoothness of the process of producing something. So particularly where you've got a multilingual project with different versions of the same document, fixing one problem before the translations is going to be better than fixing 3 problems after 3 translations. Last week, I did something where I had to fix 6 problems after 6 translations, which is slightly annoying, but there we go. So the example here, designers, in my experience, aren't all that good at tabs. We can see this is part of a sort of menu for a spa day at some posh resort somewhere. They've used very inconsistent tabs and spaces in order to position the prices over there on the right in a column. They've been inconsistent with a paragraph versus a new line, which is a kind of subtle difference that can make can cause problems later on. And you can just see that as the translated text moves, that's going to cause problems further down the line. So preparation, there may be multiple languages, there are multiple stages in the job, checking the design, doing the translation, adapting the design, because no matter how clean the original is, the translated version is always going to need some adjustment, whether it's text running longer or shorter. It may well fit nicely, but doesn't quite look right. You might just make a few tweaks. And there's always, the more people there are in a process, the more queries and checking there's going to be. I've often picked up things at the typeset stage where I've gone back and said, was the translator sure about that version? Because it doesn't quite match what's in the English. And that's, even in languages you don't know, you can sometimes spot something that just doesn't look right. It's particularly longer or shorter. The numbers don't add up. It's, there's always going to be stuff like that. So even if you're not translating this stuff, it's something that's useful to know about from a project management point of view. Tracking different files and versions is always a good measure of a project. This was quite an old project, which was an utter nightmare. Quick, which is the correct version of the cover file? Oh, is it the one called backup? No, is it the one called final? Some are docs, some are docx's. This was meant to be in Dutch, but there's two files there with DE in for German. And again, it sounds very prejudiced, but in my experience, designers are often slightly artistic and not very organized. You do need a certain amount of patience. If somebody says this is the final version, it's always just possible that it's not. And obviously a change to the wording once it's been translated causes a whole chain of events. So project management skills are somewhat important when dealing with this kind of project. So we mentioned copy fitting, in other words, making the words fit after they've been translated. We'll have a look at some other stuff that is of interest after the translation has happened, including design constraints and fonts. We ran across this little red plus sign for too much text for the box earlier on. There's a little thing called Story Editor, which shows you what's actually in the box, with a little line showing that the word nicely is just too long to fit in this box. There are many ways of making stuff fit. Making the font smaller is probably a last resort. There are many more things that you can do. Changing the line spacing can help. You can move the letters closer together. You can change the font to a condensed one, which doesn't always work very well. You can make the letters narrower artificially. And of course, you can make the boxes bigger, or in a long publication, you can link or thread the text to another box further over, in the same way that newspaper articles sometimes run across a page or up and down columns. You could even add more pages, but obviously that doesn't work if you're doing a poster or a leaflet, which is confined to whatever format the designer has chosen. And as a last resort, you could ask to have the translation rewritten to be shorter. But really, that's a very much last resort, in that you're compromising the quality of the translation for the sake of fitting stuff on the page. So, as I said, there may be print constraints. In other words, you can't add additional pages. You may not be able to reduce the font size because of accessibility reasons. It's too small to read. And corporate image also has an impact in terms of the design, in there may be certain things you're not allowed to do, which we'll have a look at in a moment. So that may feed back into the translation process. In my experience, it doesn't very often, but a rewrite does occasionally solve a particularly difficult problem. We talk corporate image. So there's a quiz for you. Which company is that? It's quite obvious. It's them. Why is it obvious that that's Easy Group? Because they've got a brand manual that describes how the brand should be presented. These can be guidelines, or they can be very strict. The colour gives it away, particularly for this company. They've carefully defined it there as a particular colour, orange. It's also the typefaces, in other words, the fonts. That big easy there in the logo is in something called Cooper Black, which is described as having soft, friendly curves and a warm personality, which is quite a lot to attribute to a font. But it does its job because it's very, very recognizable. We've got another example of a corporate redesign that happened halfway through something. This was a recipe card for ready-made icing. They give away these recipe cards on how to produce a teddy bear or cake decoration and so on. It would have been produced in English, but the company had a redesign before they produced a French version. And we can see here the redesign has what they call a brand values document. Down at the bottom right, bottom left there, I've ringed round the phrase the brand guardians, which I've occasionally heard referred to as the brand police, who have the final say on whether a design is conforms to their image. And you can see here they don't like anything to be closer to the logo than the size of the R in the company name. So here's before and after the English and the French versions of this with the new logo. In the event, I couldn't make it work with that desired amount of space. I went back to them and said, the picture is fixed to be this size because they're all that size. The French is that size for the title. Is it okay if we go slightly into the white space? And they were actually okay with that. So we've looked at corporate image. The other element of that is fonts. Normally in these projects, you don't have to choose another font. They've been chosen for you. There's a lot of different weights, unlike word processors where you can make a bold of anything just by clicking the bold button. A professional font will have a separately designed bold weight and many others as well. There's generally two families of fonts in very broad terms, serif and sans serif. The serif is that little hooky bit on the end of some letters. And it tends to be, it's not a hard and fast rule that serif fonts are a bit more traditional looking and sans serif ones are more modern looking. And we've got 8 examples there of 4 of each of classic fonts there. There is a lot of choice. Somebody produced a periodic table of typefaces, and you can see our friend Cooper Black over there, mid-right, standing out very bold indeed. There's a lot of choice. As I said, the corporate image usually dictates what you need to use, but it's possible to find characters that are not in that font's repertoire, as they call it. In other words, the range of characters available in the font. Of those 8 I showed earlier, 3 don't have the W circumflex found in Welsh, the Do Cymru. Now, fonts continue to get updated like any other software, and it's possible now, because this slide is a few years old, it's possible now that a later version of those fonts will have those characters in there. But when this happens, you get a pink box in InDesign, and I think in Word it doesn't tell you, and it substitutes a different font that does contain the character, which is not always a very helpful way to do things. So if the repertoire of the font doesn't cover your translated language, you've got to try and match the intent of the original designer. And usually it's a matter of picking a serif or a sans serif font that reasonably well matches the original one used. There's a couple of my favourites there, and you can see they cover European languages, West and East, plus Turkish, Greek, Cyrillic, and there's our Welsh W circumflex on the end. All in a single font, which is quite useful. When you go further away from the Latin scripts, here's an example for Japanese, and the two broad categories there are often known as Mincho and Gothic, which correspond more or less to serif and sans serif. And you get a more traditional feel from those kind of brush stroke style of fonts in the CJK languages, as they're called. Some fonts are designed for a specific purpose. Comic Sans was designed for speech bubbles in comics, cartoon comic strips. Here we've got a couple of pictures of it being used on a defibrillator and on a funeral services invoice, which is probably not a good match for the intention of the font. The Dutch at the bottom there says, like turning up at a gala ball in a clown costume, just doesn't work. And then particularly specialist ones, I always put this one in, Samarkand font is a really brilliant interpretation of the scripts of India for the Latin alphabet. And you see it on quite a lot of Indian restaurants around the UK and elsewhere. I've got a small collection of photos of restaurants using that font. But of course, that would be somewhat out of place on a fish and chip shop. We run into a little more complexity with what's called complex scripts, Arabic and the languages of India in particular, where the characters change shape or even position depending on their context. You can see the individual characters of Ismi there losing various bits and combining in different ways when they're combined into a single word. Now, some DTP software doesn't work at all with complex scripts. Others, you need a special version or a plugin. And some software in Page, which I did once use, is just designed for that Nastaliq script that's used predominantly in Urdu and Farsi or Persian, which is really, really elegant calligraphy style script and is an utter nightmare to typeset. We touched on right to left scripts there with Arabic and Urdu and so on. It's not just the text that needs to be dealt with there. The whole layout will need to be either what they call flipped or reversed. And a number of other things need to be taken into account there. The paragraph must run right to left, but may include left to right segments if other languages are in the middle. Page 1 of a book is at the opposite end to what a Western person would expect. Therefore, odd number pages will be on the left. You need to think about columns and tables, which may need to be reversed. And also images. If they tell a story and your story reads from left to right, they may tell the wrong story unless you change those images around for a right to left layout. So these are some of the more esoteric specialities of multilingual typesetting. Here's something which I actually got a physical copy of from the sort of NGO sector, the minimum economic recovery standards for humanitarian aid situations. And you can see there, that's the Arabic version. That's the front cover, and it's opening the other way to an English book, and page 3 there is on the left. Because of all those complexities, it's quite common to see it going wrong. These two were from the 2012 Olympics. There's a banner up in a shopping centre saying, "Welcome to London," or in Arabic, "Marhaban bikum fi London," I think, something like that. Apologies to any Arabic speakers. Underneath the left-hand one there, you can see the correct Arabic and the Arabic as it's been printed on these massive banners, where it's both left to right and not joined up, which would be the equivalent of getting off a plane in Dubai and seeing a sign all in capitals with the letters all spaced out saying "Iabud ot Emoklu," which if you carefully read it backwards might say "Welcome to Dubai." The other one there was a security poster where the word security and the rest of it has all been laid out the wrong way. They obviously knew it was a right to left language because it's right aligned there, but they didn't know that the text they'd supplied would go wrong once they added it into their software. So a couple of problems there, which are, I was going to say easily avoided, but obviously not. So that's really what I've got to say, leaving plenty of time for some questions. Plenty, he says. Oh, there's only 5 minutes left. It's about understanding the process, understanding how the design might need to be adapted before or after translation. It's about understanding what those tags are doing. So having the PDF for visual context if you're translating that kind of IDML file. It's also about translating the design so that it works as well as the original design, not just translating the words. And of course, project management is an essential feature of dealing with those things. That's all I've got to say. So I think I've just managed to fit it in. Be very happy to take some questions. Kelsey?
Yeah, that was excellent, Chris.
Do you want me to leave the presentation up or stop
yeah,
sharing and we can
it might be it might be good to keep it up just in case you want to scroll back and
need to flick back to something. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. So we did get quite a few questions in. We'll try and get everything in if we can.
I'll take a
are
sip
you
of
okay?
water then.
Yeah. Chris, are you okay to stay a few minutes late if we, just so we can answer
that's
we
fine.
got in?
Yeah, I don't expect I'll do much else today. I'm going to go and lie in a darkened room afterwards.
Fair enough. So a little bit earlier on, quite early on in the presentation, we got a question from Elia, who said, when translating texts where tabs or new lines have been inserted in order to fit neatly in a box or around an image, I tend to just ignore them and let the DTP expert fix it in their step, rather than trying to guess where I should put them. Is there a better approach translators can have when this happens?
Well, obviously the better approach is for those not to be there in the first place. I don't know what the impact is if you actually delete those tags. I imagine it would throw up all kinds of errors in your cat tool. Because whatever happens at that stage, whoever's typesetting it will need to make adjustments. If you could delete them, then they've got the advantage of starting from a clean piece of text. If you can't delete them, then fair enough. The typesetter will delete them, reposition them, mess around, and make it work eventually. No easy answer, unfortunately. There, it's you've been landed with a problem because it's not been prepared correctly.
And you know what? That kind of leads into Jenny's question, which was when a translator is sent the file, are you suggesting that they play around with these elements of the formatting prior to importing it into the cat tool?
No, um, unless you've got a copy of InDesign or something. I wouldn't recommend playing around with an IDML file. It'll probably break. Um, if you do have InDesign or FrameMaker or one of those things, um, it would be an option. Um, if you think that opening it up, cleaning it up before you translate would produce a better result, I don't see why not. Um, it's quite unusual for translators to have InDesign, though. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, Jenny Jenny said short and sweet when you answered no. So there was that. Um, yeah, and I suppose that kind of becomes a bit of a value add, doesn't it? If you can say, well, I do know
Yeah,
formatting and stuff, and
I mean,
I know how to handle it.
yeah, I've in the past a couple of times I've offered to take a look at the InDesign files and tidy them ahead of the translation company sending them to other people for translation. I've said I'll do that for nothing because it makes my job easier at the other end, and it does.
Yeah.
It makes it quicker. So what you lose in half an hour of tidy, you gain an hour's worth of smooth process at the other end.
I think,
But that's me because I'm there in the typesetting role and not in the translator role.
well,
And
I
we all know that.
suppose, the it also saves the project manager's time as well,
Mm,
doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Not having to go in and manually join segments or split segments or, something like that.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
we also got another, oh, Jenny says, thank you. It's good to get a window into the world of DTP. I've never been sent anything like this. It's
Ah,
clearly similar to the experience of sticking a PDF through OCR.
um, no, it's much better than sticking a PDF through OCR.
Yes, for
Putting a
sure.
PDF through OCR is the subject of another presentation, I
Yeah,
think.
for sure. Yeah. We've got another question from Inga, who prefaces her question saying she was 10 minutes late, and maybe this was covered, but I think that we can. It's still a good one. So she's asking, how do GTP and InDesign fit into the larger landscape? Is DTP always for print products, or does it also include digital outputs? I'm looking for the differences and or overlaps to the design tool Figma that gets used for web and app design.
Yeah. Um, it it does overlap with digital output, but not so much with web design or apps. Um, it's often used to produce interactive PDFs, that kind of thing. I mean, the whole concept of it is based around documents with a number of pages, which isn't really the concept of a web page. It's not a linear thing, a web page, whereas a product that comes out of InDesign is more or less a linear product. There may be an index or a contents page which is clickable in a PDF to take you to those things, but it's the concept of it is for a designed document, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, in terms
Yeah,
of like, yeah, it could be like ebooks or
yeah.
like reports
There's
or any sort
yeah.
of downloadable
There's
PDF.
yeah. You sorry, you just reminded me. There is a whole ebook segment of InDesign, um, which I've not really been involved with. Interestingly.
Um, We have another question. I think this is the last one for now, in case, unless there's any more that come in. Matthew says, "Great webinar, Chris. One client asks me to
Thanks.
translate directly into Canva. It is often a pain to
Hmm.
A, select the right box, and B, fit the French into the box. My solution is to reduce the size of the visuals. Not proud. What would you recommend?"
Well, it depends on the context, is my best answer. um, you're talking about the translation being too big for what's been designed,
Yeah, I think
I
so.
presume. Yeah. Well, I mean, I could flick back to that page there. There's various ways of manipulating the text to fit more in without reducing the font size, which is probably a good thing. Um, but yeah, manipulating the graphics, moving them around, um, repositioning, resizing them is a valid strategy, which in fact, I probably should have added that to my list of options there. Um, and it's something that I have done in various products, particularly with photographs, because often the subject in a photograph is not the whole area of the photograph. And you can trim the sides or top or whatever and not lose um, any of the meaning of that photograph.
Excellent. So I think that is all the questions that we have. Thank you so much, Chris.
Good.
Aniko, do you want to bring up our last
Yes.
little ditty? Thank you so
So,
much, everyone. Go on.
yeah. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found it interesting. I certainly did. Here is our website where you can find the resources that we mentioned if you haven't checked them out yet. And also, we are on LinkedIn where we regularly post some extra content. And also, as Kelsey mentioned, we are very grateful for any donations if you're able to donate. Thank you very much, everyone. And see you next time. Thank you,
Yeah,
Chris,
see you
I,
next time.
for
I
the
just
excellent.
can I
Yeah, sorry.
can I just say a couple more last things?
Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
please do.
if anybody thinks of any questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them on the TT Slack thing. Um, and also, if anybody else has got some specialist knowledge that they want to share, doing this kind of thing isn't as difficult as you might think at first. So if you wanted to put something together, I'm sure the TT team would be very happy to hear from you.
Indeed,
Thank
we
you very
would.
much. Yes, it would be. Thank you. Thank you to the attendees. Thank you, Chris, especially. So I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers,
See you
bye.
later. Bye.